Thank you very much. Appreciate all of you coming here tonight. My name is Thomas Maccabee. I'm the Executive Director of the Lloyd Magathie Water Trust. Now, Lloyd Magathie is not a person. Lloyd and Magathie are the names of two aquifers that underlie Long Island. And these aquifers, along with the upper glacial aquifer, are Long Island's only source of drinking water. Unfortunately, these aquifers are becoming contaminated, and one of the contaminants is medications. So, I met up with a fellow here in Southampton whose name is Bob Grisnick. He's a pharmacist and he owns South Thrifty Drug. And when I went into his pharmacy, I saw on his wall a plaque of a initiative that he started about 4 years ago. And if Bob, would you like to come up and just say a word or two?
Sure.
All right. This is Bob Grisnick from South Thrifty Drug, who started his own take-back program about 4 years ago.
Hi, thanks for coming, everyone. In April, well, I guess it was maybe in November of 2009, December 2009, the National Community Pharmacists Association, which is the National Association of Community Pharmacists, put out an initiative that they would like to start a take-back program. And I thought it was a great idea, to get old, expired, unused medications out of people's homes, get them away so that they don't contaminate our environment, and also especially so that our youngsters don't get a hold of them because they're left in the medicine closets or kitchen cabinets or wherever they are. So back in April of 2010, I think myself and one other pharmacy were the only pharmacies in the state of New York to work on this national program with NCPA. And at that time, they worked with the Sharps Environmental Corporation, who has a incinerator program in Houston, Texas. And we were able to buy boxes about almost this size. I think it was only about this high down. We paid $80 to have the box shipped to us, and we could put drugs in there. It was prepaid, shipped to us by UPS, fill it up, ship it, seal it up, and ship it right back to the Sharps Container Company in Houston, Texas. So that's what we did the first year. But I went a little further in that April 10th outing. I got the Southampton Police Department involved with us. And they were very helpful because I had an officer in the store that whole day with us, plainclothes detective, and he was walking around and in and out, but we took back probably 500-600 pounds of drugs that day, from 10 to 5 o'clock. And also on that particular day, I invited some other people to come and to the pharmacy because we broadcast this event live on WLNG 92.1 FM in Sag Harbor. I invited the police chief to come. It was Chief Wilson at the time, and we had him talk a little bit about how his officers find things in youngsters' cars. Where'd you get it? Got it at home? So he talked about what happens with the police department. I also brought in a representative from Alternatives, which is a counseling center for alcohol drug abuse. And Christine came in and talked a little bit about how they work with people who are abusing drugs, alcohol, and things like that. We brought in someone from the group for the South Fork, and they talked about environmental issues and how their drugs are contaminating the environment. And also I had 2 or 3 of my pharmacists there, and we talked on the radio. So it was an all-day thing. We were on the radio for 5 hours. Every hour I had a different person on the radio for 10 or 15 minutes being interviewed by the radio personality, and we got this word out. Well, this was what I did at the time. The other pharmacies in the local area of the East End found out what I did and called me and said, "You're going to do this again?" I said, "Sure." Well, we did it in April of Earth Week. It was the day after Earth Day. So I decided we'll do it again in November. At that time, we got pharmacies from East Moriches, West Hampton, 2 in Hampton Bays, 1 in Southampton, 1 in Bridgehampton, 3 in East Hampton, 1 in Southold, 1 in Shelter Island, Cutchogue, and Riverhead. So we had like 12 or 13 pharmacies participate in this program in November of 2010. It went over very well. We took in 1,000, 1,200 pounds of drugs on that particular outing of bringing things in. So since then, we've been doing it. Our next Take Back program is next Wednesday, April 23rd. We will be running it in the pharmacies that I mentioned from 10 until 5. We will also be doing a live broadcast from my pharmacy again. We're going to make it an educational piece where we'll be bringing other guest speakers in during that time period to talk about the environment and other issues, as we have done every year we do this. So we've done this now 8 different times. And over the 8 different times we've done it, we've taken in 6 tons of little bottles of medicine and big bottles of medicine, but 12,000 pounds of medicine we've taken. And we know the weight because we take it to the incinerator up at Islip, at Covanta, you know, for the town of Islip. They run the incinerator there, and that's where everything goes. We incinerate everything, environmentally friendly type incineration, and they weigh the truck as we take it in, they weigh the truck as it comes out. We pay by the ton on, you know, disposing of this medication, and it's been great. So as I mentioned, our next Take Back program is next Wednesday, April 23rd. You can go to any of the pharmacies. You'll see ads in the newspaper. They'll be on the radio, and we hope that everyone will participate and get rid of all of your old, unused, expired drugs that you have laying around the house. And as the next speakers come up, they'll tell you why you really should do that. Thank you very much.
Well, I met pharmacist Grisnick about a little over a year ago when I first moved into the neighborhood from upstate New York. And when I came to Long Island, I wanted to make sure that my drinking water was good quality. And I researched a little bit, and I found out that my water comes from the Suffolk County Water Authority. It's pretty good water, actually. But I had a moment when I found out that the Suffolk County Water Authority had chosen to close one of its wells in Montauk because it was contaminated with pharmaceuticals, 5 pharmaceuticals. And it wasn't a senior moment, it was a you gotta be kidding me moment. And that really prompted me to look into this a little bit deeper, a little bit further. And I saw that there were 2 problems, 2 issues that perhaps I could contribute to part of the solution. The one issue was keeping medications out of our drinking water. And the second issue was keeping medications out of the hands of those people, particularly teens, who might seek to divert those medications for non-medical purposes. So I began what's called the Lloyd Magathy Water Trust. And one of the first things I did is I designed and built this pharmaceutical collection receptacle, which complies with the proposed regulations proposed by the Drug Enforcement Administration to implement the Secure and Responsible Drug Disposal Act of 2010. So when I started the organization, I needed 2 directors. And Bob Grisnick agreed to be a director, and I also asked my employer, my part-time employer, for whom I work occasionally, Dr. Mary Keller. Dr. Keller is right there. Dr. Keller is a clinical psychologist from Sag Harbor, New York, and she treats a lot of ailments. Patients are sometimes on medication and sometimes not on medication, but she has developed a non-pharmaceutical therapy, and I cannot pronounce it, so I'm going to ask Dr. Mary Keller to pronounce it, from Hawaii.
Do you want me to sit right here?
Yeah, sure.
You're probably speaking about Ho'oponopono, which is is that what you're speaking of?
Yes.
Yeah, that attracted your attention. It's a very, very ancient Hawaiian, I've been asked to stand. It's a very, very ancient Hawaiian method of bringing peace, essentially. That is one of the things. It's interesting, funny name, and this funny story about how it got brought back into popular use attracted Tom. I essentially do a mind-body process that actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system as opposed to the sympathetic. And it includes some deep abdominal breathing and a guided visualization. And what I do is similar to something that I first saw when I was a graduate student at Harvard at the Mind-Body Clinic at New England Deaconess. But I have put my own twist in the ways that I prefer to do it into it. And I also use all of the traditional psychological things combined with, I just have a lifelong interest in the wisdom traditions of the world. So anything I have learned from them, and there is something going on now called energy psychology. There's something EFT tapping. I also incorporate that. And it works so great that I love doing it.
Well, it's a very interesting technique. I really don't know that much about it, but it is non-pharmaceutical. And my point being is that a lot of our ailments are best treated with pharmaceuticals, some are best treated without pharmaceuticals, and some are best treated with combinations, pharmaceutical and psychotherapy. Well, I wanted to start raising the level of awareness of the dangers of pharmaceutical contamination and responsible disposal. So that's what we're trying to do now, is in this meeting particularly, is increase the public's awareness of responsible disposal of medications. So I have a very special moderator all the way from New York City. He has his own radio talk show, and it is called For Your Ears Only. And I'm going to turn the program over to David Alpern.
Not all the way from New York City tonight. We also have a house in Sag Harbor where we spend most of our time. So thanks, Tom. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When we think about the nation's drug problem today, we often think first of Mexican drug cartels and ghetto gang shootouts, the debate over marijuana as a dangerous gateway to an escalating problem with heroin and even more dangerous drugs. This became clear to me some months ago in my role as producer and host of this syndicated weekend radio and internet program called For Your Ears Only. Initially Newsweek on air in the heyday of that magazine, now an independent nonprofit project of the New York Foundation for the Arts, and celebrating its 32nd anniversary next week. The story that focused my attention was the death of actor Philip Seymour Hoffman with a needle in his arm and surrounded by packets of heroin. That tragedy led me and many journalists to the sad truth that one of the indisputable gateways to our drug problem today is the medical profession and the way it prescribes and controls or doesn't control pain-killing drugs called opioids like OxyContin. Beyond their medical use as painkillers, these drugs can be addictive and are too often diverted for recreational use since their effects can be compared to those of heroin. And in a catch-22 of today's drug problem, making these medications more difficult to get legally leads some to get them illegally and others to get the same effects for less money from heroin bought on the street. Another catch-22 here is that patients or those in charge of them who want to prevent misuse are often tempted, as we've heard, to dispose of these medications quickly, simply, anonymously, by dumping them into the trash or, worse, the toilet, which leads them into our precious groundwater. The guest I chose for my show was Dr. Anthony Kolodny, Senior Vice President of the Phoenix House Foundation and President of a group called Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, with a long list of do's and don'ts that I have here we can discuss later. To talk more about both faces of this problem, diversion and disposal, we're joined tonight by two experts on each. And as I mention your names, maybe you could take a seat by the microphones over there so that we can hear from you. Our first two speakers are from law enforcement, the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Suffolk County Police, concerned with keeping medications out of the wrong hands. Our second two speakers are concerned with groundwater in their jobs with the Suffolk County Department of Health and the U.S. Geological Service testing water for pharmaceuticals. We'll hear from all of them first, and then there'll be time for your questions. Our first speaker from law enforcement is Agent Richard Springer with the Drug Enforcement Administration. Agent Springer is a group supervisor in the Drug Diversion Unit, and I guess since it's crowded up there, why don't we do this one at a time? So when you're finished, you'll just keep your seat and we'll add to the party. Tell us exactly how you define pharmaceutical drug diversion and how you find and fight it.
DEA is the federal agency that oversees all the controlled substances in the United States. We oversee the illegal drugs that are imported into the country, and we also oversee the pharmaceutical drugs, the controlled drugs, which are needed by the medical industry to service the community. A lot of people don't understand when we say controlled substances, these are drugs that are highly addictive, drugs that have a property that can become addictive. Not all prescriptions are controlled substances. In fact, most of them are not. But you do need a prescription for a controlled substance. So when the federal government is speaking of controlled substances, we're talking about the 5 scheduled addictive classes of drugs. And that's what we regulate. We do not regulate non-controlled drugs. That is primarily the FDA. These drugs are highly sought after, and they're highly diverted. Primarily, right now, the drug of choice is Oxycontin, or oxycodone, the 30-milligram tablet, to be specific. That is the drug on the street because it equates into a packet of heroin. But that's just a general overview of what we do.
Well, that's the definition, and what do you do about it?
Well, we try to educate the public, and we have oversight over the registrants. Now, anyone that's connected with controlled substances needs a DEA registration. That goes for the importers, the manufacturers, the distributors, right down to the doctors and into the pharmacy. If we have information that there is a registrant that is not following the law, well, then a criminal case would be initiated and possibly an arrest would follow. There are also civil penalties and administrative penalties for registrants that don't follow the regulations.
Okay, well, let's then move to the local angle. Our second speaker from law enforcement is Detective Lieutenant Robert Donahue with the Suffolk County Police Department. He's in charge of Operation Medicine Cabinet. So, Lieutenant Donahue, why don't you tell us exactly what it is and why you picked that name?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I apologize for my voice tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Suffolk County Police started a drug reclamation program in August of 2010. And what that program entails is collecting unwanted or expired drugs. We were the first police department in New York State to offer that on a 24/7 basis in all of our precincts. We have a similar receptacle like you see to the right, except ours is sort of like an old mailbox, as you may remember from years ago. To date, we've collected over 19,000 pounds of unwanted expired medications. Why did we do that? Well, for 2 reasons. We know that when young adults get hooked on heroin, they generally don't start with heroin. They typically start abusing prescription drugs, such as Oxycontin, Percocet, Vicodin. For the most part, these drugs are available right in your medicine cabinet. Usually, a family member, an adult member, would have some sort of injury or oral surgery. They would get a valid prescription for Oxycontin or some other analgesic, and at some point, they would remain in the medicine cabinet, which now that young adult, that teenager, experiments with, eventually gets hooked on those type of drugs, and which now leads to heroin use. Ironically, the program of iStop, which I believe will probably be discussed at some point tonight, has increased the use of heroin by cutting down on abusing prescription drugs and doctor shopping or people abusing the pharmacy system. Kids are now reverting directly to heroin, purchasing heroin for as little as $7 to $8 a bag, as opposed to getting prescription drugs like OxyContin. So that's the main reason we started this. The second reason is the environmental reason. We all know about prescription drugs and non-prescription drugs finding their way into our water system and our landfills. Our program works very similar. In fact, I think we got Southampton PD on board with this years ago. Our drugs are collected and they're brought to an incinerator in Pennsylvania. To date, we've collected over 19,000 pounds. So the hope is to offer this program as a component of reducing drug use among young people. It's not the only answer. You have treatment, you have education, and you have enforcement. We know that enforcement is limited, especially with addicts. We are certainly interested in enforcing people that sell drugs. That's another story. I think evidence is pretty clear that people addicted to drugs need to get treatment, which brings up an entire different problem with the limited treatment facilities, especially among young people. So that's an area that really needs to be discussed and looked at in light of insurance restrictions and regulations for treating people as young as 13 or 14 years old. So as I mentioned, each of our 7 precincts have a box like that. It's open, our precincts are open 24/7. So we do advertise the program. We encourage people to come any hours of the day and night, no questions asked. They don't have to remove the drugs from their containers. They simply get placed in the box. We have officers that collect them once a week. They get bagged, weighed. They get brought to our center in Yaphank, and eventually they're shipped under police guard to Pennsylvania. County Executive Steve Malone has taken this one step further in that he is offering a drug reclamation program to senior centers one day each month. 7 separate senior centers in Suffolk County is doing the same thing. We bring portable receptacles with a police officer for 3 hours, and we collect drugs at the senior centers. Our first event was last Wednesday. We collected 229 pounds. Well, the reason for that is there are many people that don't want to go to a police station. So we wanted to give another opportunity, not to mention elderly people that may want to not travel as far, now have that option. Not to mention they're already responding in many cases to the senior center. So we think that'll be a nice addition to our Operation Medicine Cabinet. So as I mentioned, just to sum up, it's one component. This is not the answer to the drug problem. Again, nor is law enforcement by itself the answer to the drug problem. The Suffolk County Police Department does a very good job at arresting people. We have no problem with arresting drug dealers. We have ongoing investigations. We actually work closely with the DEA to bring federal charges against people that are dealing larger quantities of drugs. The good thing about federal statutes, unlike state statutes, are that they're generally harsher. There's less plea bargaining. And it tends to get the attention of some higher-end drug dealers than what we have on a local level. So, again, anything we can do in the police department, I'm hoping that this issue expands to now encompass treatment, both in-house treatment and outpatient treatment. Because I can see what we're dealing with on the county level, what I'm dealing with people that call, and I speak to parents all the time. And what's different about this issue, as opposed to some other problems in society, is that this is across the whole socioeconomic band. This is not limited to certain neighborhoods. In fact, some of our biggest problems are occurring in townships like Smithtown, Hauppauge, and Esconset. So we've had over 200 fatalities, deaths in Suffolk and Nassau County last year. which is unheard of, and that's a direct result of overdosing. And I think it's fair to say there are more than that go undiagnosed as far as people that are harming themselves and their family by engaging in illegal drug activity.
Thank you. We'll move over to the danger of this problem for people who don't really think they have any connection with pharmaceuticals, and that goes to the water that we drink. So our next speaker is Douglas Feldman, a professional engineer who serves as chief of the Department of Water Resources in the Suffolk County Department of Health. Mr. Feldman, the next 10 minutes are yours. Why don't well, okay, you can come back, but there'll be questions, but, I mean, you could all end up sitting there, whatever. So tell us how you're connected with the problem, how it is evident to you, and the danger that it seems to present.
Well, in the Suffolk County Health Department, our primary function is to regulate public water supplies, as well as other drinking water wells, such as private wells, to ensure they meet state and federal drinking water standards on a regular basis. How we do that in the Health Department is we perform an annual inspection of every public water supply facility, meaning the pump station, on an annual basis. And we sample their water, what we call surveillance sampling, once every year of every public supply well. We also have a private drinking water program for private wells and homeowners, whereby a homeowner can call in for a nominal fee and we'll perform an entire complete comprehensive water analysis of well over 300 analytes, including pharmaceutical and personal care products. Basically, that's mostly what we do. We basically want to ensure people have drinkable water and that it consistently meets state and federal standards. As far as the pharmaceutical and personal care products, of the 300 analytes that we test for on a regular basis, we're doing about maybe 30 different pharmaceutical and personal care compounds. So it's not just the prescription drugs, it's various ingredients in soaps, shampoos, aspirin, even DEET, which is the insect repellent. A lot of these compounds could be considered pharmaceuticals or personal care products. These ingredients are co-ingredients in a whole host of products, not just pharmaceuticals. They could even be BHA and BHT, which we'll get into later, which are actually food additives. But DEET could be considered an insect, which is an insect repellent. It could be a pesticide. It could be a personal care product that you can put on your person or your clothing. So those are really the primary ways and means we ensure drinking water, is to perform surveillance sampling. And that's in addition to our public suppliers, who do an excellent job. They do self-monitoring in accordance with EPA and state standards. So they perform their own monitoring. The health department does surveillance monitoring to ensure you have a different set of eyes. We take samples in different sets in different locations within the public water supply system, as well as not only at the well field, but also in the distribution system or the piping system, to ensure that the water delivered to customers consistently meets standards. So, for instance, if we have a detect or we have an elevated value that's either exceeds a drinking water standard or is near drinking water standard, the monitoring could alert the public water supplier to provide either treatment or, if necessary, take a well offline, again, to protect the public. With respect to private well homeowners, again, private wells are not regulated by the state, so we can't force someone to actually sample their water. They can contact the health department, or they can use a separate contract laboratory to perform the sampling. If we collect the sample and we see an elevated value, we notify that homeowner, and we provide an entire written analysis of their result, and we provide some sort of guidance, such as that you might need a GAC carbon filter to remove some of the organic compounds. And that's even besides the pharmaceutical and personal care products. It could also be a pesticide or a pesticide breakdown product or a VOC or an SVOC. But the pharmaceuticals and personal care products are organic compounds, and some of those are picked up by the similar analyses performed by a laboratory or a contract laboratory. So those are the primary means to help protect drinking water within the county, and those are the county programs.
Okay, our next speaker came all the way from Troy, New York, near Albany. Patrick Phillips is a hydrologist and chief of the National Water Quality Assessment Program for the U.S. Geological Service. He's done a lot of research on pharmaceuticals in sewers, groundwater, surface water, and I wonder if he can talk about how the closer we look, the more we find, I guess in part because tests are set up so that you have to know and specifically be looking for something to see if it's there.
My name is Pat Phillips. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey. I feel kind of partly to blame because 10 years ago, a guy from Iowa said, with the USGS, said, can you go out and collect some wastewater samples for me? Like, what's in it for me? He goes, a trip to the wastewater treatment plant. And as part of that, we went out and found pharmaceuticals in the environment. Now, they had found these in Europe, and this was the first time in the United States, and people started putting two and two together, and the next thing you know, it's a bad idea to flush pharmaceuticals down the toilet. And that's kind of the genesis, started in part because guys like me are unafraid of going to wastewater plants. So this is really kind of why people are here today in terms of the interest in the environment. How many people have septic systems? Wow, that's a lot. When you take a drug, you excrete it. Sometimes it's changed, sometimes it isn't. People in the old days used to pour them down the drain. And that goes out into the soil, and then, oh, who cares where it goes? Well, it goes into the groundwater. So I'm going to talk about emerging contaminants, which includes pharmaceuticals, drugs, those kinds of things. We have a few examples here. Estradiol is an estrone naturally occurring. You could call it a pharmaceutical. There are also synthetic ones. Anyone know what sulfamethoxazole is? It's an antibiotic. It gets into groundwater very easily, and recently it's been implicated in interfering with the ability of an aquifer to naturally take out nitrogen from the groundwater. And everyone knows that taking nitrogen out of the groundwater is a good thing. So there's a lot of things. Pharmaceuticals are biologically active. They're designed to be biologically active. Now, biologically active means a lot of things. For sulfamethoxazole, it kills bacteria, which is good most times, but sometimes it's not so good. Carbamazepine is a mood stabilizer, so it's widely prescribed. There's a bunch of mood enhancers, things like that, like antidepressants. And what people have found recently is antidepressants can actually, when fish are exposed to them, it can actually change the way they reproduce, because fish get in the mood by using some of the same chemistry that antidepressants do. So if nothing else, what you can come away with this is when we put these things on the land and they get into the groundwater and they discharge towards estuaries, a number of important biological activities that we like can be affected. Next slide.
Could I just ask you, with regard to the 4 that you've shown, are those 4 that you're seeing? I mean, why do you show those 4 contaminants?
Because I was hoping there was a chemist in the house who'd be like, ooh, look, structures. No, we do see those. Caffeine, everyone uses, well, not everyone uses, a lot of people use caffeine. Sometimes if you don't have enough caffeine, things blink in and out and you have like little things.
And where are you seeing those? Is this all of New York State, or?
We see caffeine wherever sewage is poorly treated. Carbamazepine is very resistant to removal. So each one of these can vary in their ability to get into receiving waters, be it surface water or groundwater. Sulfamethoxazole is really interesting if you're a science nerd like me, because it gets into groundwater really readily, and it's highly used. So, and estradiol is one of the hormones that people are very interested in because first of all, I'll let you know, the Canadians will do anything with drugs, because they had a lake and they took 1 nanogram per liter, which is really small, of synthetic estrogen. They dosed it to the lake, and all the male fish turned girl fish, and there was no reproduction. So all these things can have different biological activities, and it actually can interact. So the next slide, and I'm not going to bore you with everything, but, oh no, I know I won't bore you with this. This is just kind of a cross-section of where you guys live. You guys live on top of a sandbar out here, okay? And you get your groundwater from down there, and there's different levels. You have the upper glacial, you have the Magathy, you have the Raritan confining clay, and the Lloyd aquifer. I think we've heard about Magathy and the Lloyd today, so this gives a nice indication. Next slide, please. On a simpler diagram, we have houses, and they have septic system, and stuff goes down there. And we have groundwater wells here, and we pull our groundwater in, and there's water of different ages that can reflect different water quality. Okay, so there's water that's hundreds of years old, that's not really affected by man, but there's more recently recharged water that, depending on where you are in the system, particularly close to streams, there can be a lot of that more recent water affecting the quality of the streams or of estuaries. Next slide. You can't see this, but what this shows is about 10 years ago we did some work, and we continue to do some work with the Suffolk County Water Authority and other government agencies to look at the occurrence of these compounds in groundwater. And we've recently, in the last few years, developed a number of new methods that bring us up to about 300 to 350 pharmaceuticals and personal care products. And so what we're doing is we're expanding our analytical capability and at the same time trying to focus on those areas where we should have the greatest concern. In a lot of cases, this is probably near septic systems that are close to coastal areas. Next slide. We've also been doing some water near Lake Ronkonkoma, and we're going to be releasing that in a little while. I think if we have the next slide, we can show some of the compounds we found. We found nitrogen and phosphorus, which is fairly common. We looked for pharmaceuticals, fecal indicator bacteria, and hormones as well. Next slide. So we collected groundwater here around Lake Ronkonkoma. We're also looking at areas adjacent to the estuaries as part of some effort that was done towards assessing the effects of the last hurricane, because we think that that affected the ability of the aquifers to remove nutrients and other compounds. Next slide. I just want to show you the kind of compounds we were finding. In one of the wells, we found fluconazole, which is an antifungal, methyl benzotriazole, which is a de-icer, but it's also an industrial solvent. We're beginning to get an idea that these things are fairly ubiquitous, although at a low concentrations. There's that carbamazepine. Carbamazepine is fairly ubiquitous because it resists any kind of removal mechanism. Okay, so it's very resistant. These things can vary quite a bit in how resistant they are to removal. Meprobamate, very low concentrations here. We're beginning to get data back from our more recent sampling, and we're beginning to see higher concentrations. So we're going to focus on areas where this may impact the estuaries. Next slide. We also have a case study that we're going to be publishing soon on what's going on at Fire Island National Seashore with the septic systems there. One of the things that I think that we can come to as a conclusion is the most important effects that we see from these probably isn't the contamination of groundwater. First of all, we don't have standards for a lot of these pharmaceuticals in terms of looking at their presence in water and saying, okay, you can't drink the water when it's above this. But if you look at some kind of, a very low sub-dosage level, you'd have to drink a fair amount of water, I mean liters, hundreds of liters, to get a therapeutic dose, even from some of the worst contamination we've seen. We think it may have more of an ecological effect, where it affects the ecology, the interaction between bacteria, it can affect fish behavior and those things. So these are the kinds of things we're working on. But it gives you another reason not to pour your pharmaceuticals down the drain. By doing so and by having these kinds of activities and giving them away, you're making your children safer so little kids don't get in there and get poisoned, and you're helping the environment as well. Thanks.
Great. Can I ask the other guests to come back to the microphone?
In the audience right now are some people that I'd like to recognize. Warren Booth is from the Hampton Bays Water District. Dieter von Leesten is the co-chair of the Southampton Town Sustainability Committee. Bridget Fleming is a councilwoman from Southampton Town. Justice Deborah Cooperstein is the founder of the East End Drug Court. Did I say that correctly?
East End Regional Intervention Court.
And with her is Charlene Masia. Okay. And also, there's a gentleman who made a long trip here to be here tonight. His name is Al Hesse. Al is the director of pharmacy for King Cullen. He has 11 pharmacies under his management, and Al is over there. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to start off with a few questions. First, on law enforcement. My understanding is that the box that Tom has designed is total anonymity. That is, people don't know, nobody knows who's put material in here, and the liner bags inside are never opened, so that there's no inspection of it. But I gather that the police department does it a little differently, and while I'd like to hear about the anonymity, there is also some looking at the material that's been turned in. So it would be interesting to know whether it's prescription or non-prescription drugs that are mostly being disposed of, and to what degree you actually get illegal substances that people want to get rid of.
Actually,
Move the microphone, especially with
Do you
your
want the
voice.
police department on this, or?
Well, let's start with the police department, and then we'll get the DEA view.
Actually, it's the same system. We don't inspect the drugs when they are removed from our receptacle. They're placed into a bag, they're sealed, they're brought to our facility, and then weighed in that bag, and eventually brought to an incinerator and disposed of. So no, we don't categorize anything. We don't know what's controlled, what's not controlled. All we ask is that we don't have needles or liquid medications dropped off, and sometimes we do receive needles and liquid medications, but it's completely anonymous.
Well, federally, we have the drug take-back program. The next one is going to be on the 26th, so if you missed the one at Bob's Pharmacy, you can, 3 days later, you can go to that one. The locations are throughout the United States. Here on Long Island, you have the Southampton Police Department, the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. I don't know where that is, but I'm sure you do. There's 3 locations in Riverhead, the State Police, the Riverhead Police, and one other facility in there. But again, it's total anonymity. We don't inspect what goes into those boxes. When the drug take-back program was started, it was about 5 years ago, and initially the information we were getting is that the young people were starting younger and younger to experiment with the controlled substances. And this was the other information was that all these controlled substances were being obtained through home medicine cabinets, their parents, their grandparents, their friends' parents. So there was some thought on, well, how can we alleviate this in some way? And they said, well, if we have a drug take-back, people can bring these medications and it'll be anonymous and they can put them in a receptacle and it'll be destroyed. Well, pretty soon, everybody said, well, most people don't know the difference between controlled and non-controlled. So this can't be just controlled substances. It has to be all pharmaceuticals and all medicines. So in answer to the question, do we know what percentage of these drugs are actually controlled? How much is shampoo, vitamins, etc.? No, we don't know, because that is not inspected. It goes into the box. The boxes are sealed. They're all gathered together, and eventually they're incinerated.
One more question for law enforcement. There's a debate around what they call Narcan kits, based on a drug called naloxone, I guess, which can prevent a fatal overdose and save lives. And the critics say that addicts or users who know that the police department is equipped with these kits are less likely to be afraid of using the hardest drugs. So I know you're not speaking for the departments, but I wonder how you feel about it. First of all, does the Suffolk County Police Department carry these kits regularly?
All of the police officers on patrol in Suffolk County Police carry Narcan.
And is there a debate within the department, I mean, as to whether the risk of making people feel like, well, it's not a problem, somebody will save me, is worth taking?
So. We've had multiple, the same victim, the same person, revived twice, which is unfortunate. But for the most part, it's not really true, and it's not up to us to judge the merits of offering that type of treatment.
Let's get the DEA opinion.
Well, to tell you the truth, this is the first time I'm hearing that statement, that the drug addicts are no longer afraid that they'll overdose. So.
Well, that's the criticism, that it makes them feel that there's a safety net, and so it doesn't appear to be as dangerous as it really is.
I really can't answer that. This is the first I'm hearing about that.
I would doubt that an addict's purpose would be to push the envelope.
It's a mistake usually. They're not trying to kill themselves. All right, let me then just two questions to our scientists. You've talked about these levels are really rather low. You'd have to drink half a lake to get a therapeutic dose. But as we learn more and more about individual, especially individual sensitivities to kinds of drugs that most people aren't affected by, but some small number of people are, what are we finding about the effects on human beings that you're trying to prevent? But what kind of studies are you seeing to the degree that these substances are really dangerous to more than fish?
Oh, okay, I guess I'll.
Well, first one, then the other.
Yeah, I think by and large, people are really hesitant to do testing on humans at subtherapeutic doses of combinations of pharmaceuticals because, there's whole ethical things. So there's not a lot of data out there. The data that I've seen, and I would say the consensus among people who are looking at this, scientists, the environmental scientists, is that it's much more of a biological effect because we've seen those effects in the wild, and we've seen...
When you say biological effect, you mean on other than humans?
Right. So, biology includes bacteria and other things. So they're seeing, for example, they've shown examples where if you take sulfamethoxazole and you put it into an aquifer, all of a sudden the bacteria just don't remove the nitrogen like they used to. So that's the kind of things that we see that we can point to and say, okay, all right, that's an important environmental setting and compound that in combination can affect the environmental well-being.
I would just add, I'm an engineer, so I'm not a medical professional, but the EPA has indicated that they're suspected endocrine-disrupting compounds to people. Although some of these compounds may not cause acute toxicity, that in turn can affect development and growth, particularly in younger children or toddlers. So for more information on that, I would recommend you go to the EPA website. The DEC also has a great website. I think USGS has a lot of good websites from what Phil was talking about from the environmental standpoint. So that's one of the suspected concerns.
Questions from the audience? Why don't you?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, why don't you come over here so you can be mic'd because come sit.
In Long Island, in the aquifer, it's my understanding that it could take up to 100 years for a drop of water to enter into the actual aquifer we're drawing from. We're seeing drugs in the aquifer now that in 50 years is going to be a higher concentration because it's taking that long for it to get in there. I think this is more of a wake-up call that we have to watch, that, yeah, it's low levels now, but that we're still in the beginning. Patent medicine's only since 1951. It's 50 years. So I think as time progresses, we're going to see more and more compounds coming in. So I think we can't just say it's not affecting us because it's low concentrations now, because it's going to increase. We don't know how long a drug that's deposited down the toilet in a septic system is trapped there and then all of a sudden becomes active and hits the water. So I think you're just seeing the beginning of it. It's just the top of the iceberg. And you would agree with that, correct?
Yeah, I would. And part of what we're doing is the data that we have now, which in some ways is fairly sparse. But again, we're improving our ability to look at a wider variety of things that should occur. But yeah, you have a very good point, and it's some of the things we should be looking at.
Yeah, and got to worry about antibacterial soap is killing bacteria in the septic systems too. So, that kind of thing. We're affecting our whole environment that way.
Yes.
Next.
Richard Springer from the DEA. I've got your PowerPoint up behind you, and I'm on that slide. What additional information can you tell us? And if you'd like me to flip through those slides for you so you could add? Go ahead.
Can I come over there? Because this is kind of hard to see.
No, it would be better if you would.
All right, that was just that was a slide to demonstrate that the reason that DEA started the drug take-back was because it appeared that teenagers were getting younger and younger and younger. And the source of these drugs was their parents' medicine cabinet, their grandparents, their friends, etc. Okay, that's the Suffolk County Police Department. The Suffolk County Police Department was very early on, they also joined in on the take-back. And they have, as the lieutenant said, they have their receptacles 24/7 in their precincts. So if you live in Suffolk County, you can go into any of the precincts at any time. The DEA take-back, it's nationwide, but it's only 4 hours on a Saturday, once in the spring and once in the fall. What do you... All right, this is part of the presentation. These are statistics, and when you get into the, the drug and the law enforcement end of this, the statistics are never ending. They're mind-boggling. These are some of the statistics that, you can come across. But I just put these up there because everybody has statistics. This is the CDC, all right? Law enforcement has statistics. The courts have statistics. The hospitals have statistics. The rehab people, they all have statistics. And all the statistics, after a while, your eyes glaze over and you become numb. But, can you get into it? All right. I want to show you, I want to share with you something that, and it was touched on here, I think, by the doctor. This is a very easy statistic, all right? This was the census in 2010. From 2000 to 2010, the population of the United States went up 9.7%. All right, so we gained less than 10% in population. Okay. Now we have a thing called ARCOS in DEA. It means the Automated Reporting System of Controlled Substances. What this does is all the manufacturers and distributors, they report to DEA all the controlled substances that they sell at a retail level, which is primarily pharmacies and hospitals. All right, so now if you look at these statistics, for a 10% increase in population, this is where the opioids went in those 10 years. Oxycodone, which is the drug of choice now, it went up 310%. That's how much they produced more. Hydrocodone, 171% more. Methadone, 1,000%, and that's because doctors started using methadone for pain. It was traditionally used as a maintenance drug for narcotics addicts, but they decided to use it for pain, and it just soared. It went 1,000%. The addict population is relatively stable that's being treated in methadone, but once they started using it for pain, it went up. Oh, this, you click it again, right? Yeah. Keep going. As you can see, in 2011, it keeps going up. Now it's 315%, 200%. They're saying 1,000% for methadone. My question to you is, where did we get all this pain? Where did all this pain come from? All right, this is...
A big part of this increase in use of painkillers came from the federal government's mandate that, and the right of patients in hospitals and in long-term care facilities could not be in pain, and they had to treat them. And that's part of the increase. The doctors started using them more freely because they're worried about the mandate that they can't have a patient in pain. So they have to prescribe something. And that was part of this increase. It's being looked at now, but that's a big part of this increase in the use.
Yeah, I've heard that from doctors quite frequently.
Well, because it's the truth. Because the federal government mandated that they are liable if a patient is kept in pain, and they could be sued.
But still, these percentages are way, way out of skew.
They're out of skew because prescription medicines are being abused. But that was a lot of the increase. It's a whole thing that happened. It's kind of the pharmaceutical industry coming out with new drugs and promoting these new drugs also that caused the increase. But a lot of it was the federal mandate that they can't leave a person in pain. So the doctors are afraid for their,
Now, 2012, it's starting to come down. It looks like we turned the corner.
Come sit over here.
It's coming down. It's going down.
It looks like we turned the corner to a slight degree, all right? A lot of this has to do with, there's a variety of factors. The HMOs have stopped subsidizing large quantities of drugs, all right? So, for instance, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, I know in Connecticut, they put a limit on the amount of narcotics you could obtain. So that's brought a lot of it down.
The DEA has also brought it down.
Can you go back? Well,
the DEA's
there's
effort.
the phone numbers.
He's missing on that point. The DEA's effort in watching the distribution through the wholesalers has kept it out of the hands of people that were dispensing it and, distributing it illegally. That's a big part of it also.
But this is, and I'm the first to admit, this is a problem that we're not going to arrest our way out of, and the lieutenant mentioned that before. It's too widespread.
All right, let's take a question from the audience over here. Why don't you stay here and use this microphone?
Okay.
I'm Deborah Cooperstein. I'm a town justice out here, and for 10 years have been presiding at the East End Regional Intervention Court. I support the program very much. As some of you don't know, Bob came to talk to our local magistrates meeting last year, our monthly meeting. We know it's a serious problem, and certainly the judges in the treatment court understand about oxycodone, Mr. Springer, without question. I would say this, that from my experience here, and it is limited to the East End, I would say that the gateway drug is marijuana, and of course, the pills at the farm parties, which many people don't know about. The farm parties are particular to teenagers. Oxycodone abuse is not particular to teenagers. I do find, as a criminal court judge, that many adults find it convenient to say it's the kids on the drugs. It isn't. It's children of all ages, people. This is a society that is using a lot of drugs, and I don't know where the pain comes from an existential point of view, Mr. Springer, but there's a lot of it. But all the judges out here support this program, and I think it's wonderful to talk about it, because the more we talk about the drugs, and we don't pretend it doesn't exist, and we act like it's somebody else and not everybody, then we don't solve the problem, and you can't arrest out of it. And I happen to believe in drug treatment court for nonviolent offenders. They work, and we work very closely with all of our law enforcement. So, gentlemen, it's very interesting, and it's frightening what you said about Canada, sir. I must tell you that.
Somebody else.
My name is Dieter von Leesten. I'm co-chair of the Southampton Sustainability Committee. We are talking about all the problems and what the DEA and the police does to stop and help in this. Why aren't we going any further and say is small pharmacies push to get a return of disposable medicine in these boxes? Where is the big chemical industry? Why aren't we forcing the big industry, the chemical producers, the large chain pharmacies, CVS, Rite Aid, and who they are, that they are taking the stuff back? They don't do it yet. It's only the small guys who are presently doing it. We are trying to find desperately money to get more boxes into certain places, but where the big amount of drugs are turning, there is no return possible.
Do you have a comment on that?
I do. Excuse me.
Why don't you take the microphone? Thanks.
I was at a press conference last year with Senator Schumer, who announced then that he was putting forth legislation to allow pharmacies, or either allow or mandate, I believe it was allow, the ability to take back drugs, especially the drugs that they give out, that they sell. There are some problems with that. There's security problems. There's security problems for the pharmacy itself, as far as robbery, burglary, et cetera. And there's a financial issue as to who would pay for that and how that would work. So I don't know what the latest update is on that legislation, but he did announce a year ago he was pushing that, Senator Schumer.
The DEA have a view on that?
Well, the law was changed. I mean, the reason that we have take-backs and the reason that we need these things is, as the gentleman said, once the drugs leave the controlled chain, right, which means once it goes to the patient, there is no way for it to come back into the chain. All right, but to take your point, distributors, anybody who's registered by DEA, they have the ability to return drugs, transfer drugs, and things like that. But once the drugs leave the pharmacy, there is no way for it to come back. There is no way that the pharmacist can take it back. There is no way that anybody can take it back. It's up to the individual to dispose of it.
You mean according to the terms of the law?
According to the law. Now, the law has been changed. However, the rules that will govern the law, in other words, when Congress makes a law, then it goes to the agency that's charged with enforcing the law, and now the rules have to be formulated. So that's another process. So that's where we are now. The rules, how this is all going to work, as the lieutenant said, it's complicated. How this is all going to work, that's what's being more or less hashed out now. And eventually, there will be facilities where people can just bring the drugs, possibly back to the pharmacy. I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of different lobbying groups that are involved in this, as you can imagine. And
Currently, federal law prohibits a pharmacy from taking back medications.
at this time, yes. But the law has been changed. It's just to see where the regulation is going to take it.
All right, another question.
Tom's going to talk, not me. Okay, Tom, tell them about the law, when it was passed, when it was signed into law, and what's happening with that law right now.
Well, first I'll mention a law that was passed in 1970. It was called the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, signed into law by President Richard Nixon. That law is 40-some years old. In 2010, on October the 21st, Barack Obama signed into law legislation which is called the Secure and Responsible Drug Disposal Act of 2010. The responsibility to implement that law was given to the Drug Enforcement Administration, who was responsible for writing the regulations to implement that law. Now, in December 2012, DEA published proposed regulations to implement that law. They received public comment for a period of 60 days. And it is now 36, 37 months since the law was passed. We still do not have those regulations, which will allow a retail pharmacy to collect controlled substances as well as non-controlled. So at this point in time, for now, these types of receptacles can be placed in retail pharmacies provided that signage says non-controlled only. However, these boxes can be put in police departments, in the lobbies of police departments, and it can where it can collect controlled substances as well as non-controlled. Did I get it? Okay.
Tom, where is your box now effectively operating?
Well, there's two in operation. One is at the Southampton Police Department. Southampton Village Police Department, and the other is at Bob Grisnick's pharmacy. The one at the police department has signage that says controlled and non-controlled. The one at the pharmacy says non-controlled only. However, what I've done with the one at Bob Grisnick's is I've engaged the village police department to come to the pharmacy and take custody of the medications that are collected at the pharmacy. And the village police they're responsible for disposal.
But as we've heard, the packages are closed and they're put into a bag that is sealed, so nobody knows in the end, between the time it's deposited and destroyed, whether it is controlled or uncontrolled.
That is exactly what the proposed regulations published by DEA say. It goes into a what's called an inner liner. The inner liner has to be tamper evident. It has to be opaque so no one can see what's in it. Whatever is deposited cannot be counted, it cannot be sorted, it cannot be cataloged, it can never ever be touched by a human hand again. The bag has to be sealed immediately. There have to be 2 witnesses who sign a form that says, yes, we sealed it up, and then it has to be disposed of. I'll also mention this, that the Environmental Protection Agency issued a memorandum in 2012 that says, at this point in time, our best method of disposal is incineration. And there are 4 places on Long Island where these medications can be incinerated. I think that's it for the box.
But so in the end, although the law distinguishes between controlled and non-controlled, it's kind of understood that if you bring a package, nobody's going to see what's in it. It gets disposed of and it gets out of the traffic.
Exactly. And
Okay.
I think there's a question right there.
Sure.
Yes, for the environmental folks, are we, do we know which ones are in the excreted and which ones we think are being disposed of down the toilet as a mechanism for getting into the environment?
Don't take a shot at it first.
No, I don't know. I think that from what we've seen, Steve, we test for a limited number of these compounds. Many would be related to sewage disposal facilities, particularly caffeine, BHA and BHT, acetaminophen, some of the perfumes, the D, fragrances, carbamazepine, I think we had mentioned that, and there's some anti-lipid drug, cholesterol, statins, cholesterol-controlling drugs. So they would definitely from sewage disposals, wastewater treatment facilities. They could be from manure spreading. They could be from animal feedlots, things like that. But we're finding very low detections in our drinking water samples. Again, low meaning like maybe half a ppb, half a part per billion on average, based on the 18,000 or more samples we've collected during the past 10 years. More so in private wells than the public supply wells. But there are traces in our public water supply wells, and that's a little concerning because these wells are very deep wells, whereas the private wells are shallow. But it's likely a source from some kind of disposal, whether it's kitchen wastewater, domestic sewage, wastewater treatment facilities, or some other type of facility. And given the porous aquifer and our vulnerable aquifer, that's probably the source.
Go ahead, Tom.
This question is for Patrick Phillips. You mentioned to me over the phone, the closer we look, the more we find. And I guess my question is, are the analytical methods that are being developed going to find even more pharmaceuticals in our water than we currently find now?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that we'll find more. But I think what we're doing is we're also expanding based on better analytical methods and based on better understanding from other places and fine-tuning our approach. For example, wastewater treatment plants generally tend to do a much better job than septic systems do. And some of the septic systems in this region don't do a very good job at all. So the question that Steve had regarding, do we tell whether it's excreted or it's been through treatment, sometimes there's a huge difference between what we see in the environment from a treated sample from a septic system than from a wastewater treatment plant. So yeah, I think we're going to continue to see more, but we'll hone in on the ones that are the most important.
Let me just add this, but isn't part of the problem in all of this testing is you have to test for a specific thing, and so you're limited by what you can think of testing for, and you're thinking of more and more things to be looking for.
I'm not a chemist, but we have some really smart chemists, and we also have some better instrumentation now that's going to look at the unknowns and make sure that they're knowns, which knowns and unknowns. I remember that from a few years ago.
Rumsfeld.
Yeah. But we're going to do a better job in terms of looking at these things, and we have much better instrumentation. That's the next frontier, is to say, what's in this sample? We have to pick, right now, we have to pick ahead of time. What are we going to look for? But now, because we have such very good ways of measuring the mass of the compound, okay, what that means is we can match that up with a library and say, we think that this compound is there, then go back and get a standard, and then look for that. So the loop will be closed a lot quicker.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Councilwoman Bridget Fleming from Southampton Town, and I wanted to just make a comment following up on Mr. Phillips' point. You seemed a little alarmed when almost everyone raised their hand in terms of having private septic systems. And in fact, the Suffolk County is 70% non-sewered. And when you get further out east, like we are here, it can get as high as 90%. We have a lot of small lots. And then on top of that, we have 350 miles of coastline in a 140 square mile town. So if you're going to be focusing someplace where it matters for the estuaries, may I suggest that we are the perfect spot.
It's just I'm a simple country boy from upstate where we have lots of wastewater.
You talk about streams. We've got a lot of bays, that are impacted by this stuff, and I think Mr. Hess's point is an excellent one, that this is the tip of the iceberg, and we need to take it very seriously.
And apropos of that, we have been out sampling groundwater down gradient of septic systems as part of our Hurricane Sandy follow-up. And that's been chosen, and I've been working with Sean Fisher, Chris Schubert, Steve, Irene Fisher from our office here. And we've looked in a number of different settings across, particularly Peconic Bay, Western Bay, areas like that, to try to get a sense of this and also get a baseline in case we have another inundation. Because what the inundation also did was, by putting salt water on the aquifer, it changed the microbiological community and probably reduced the ability to remove nitrogen in these other compounds. So yeah, that's definitely something on our especially the south shore of Long Island in Suffolk County.
Right, and here on Long Island, it's a sole source aquifer as well. So it's just a combination of factors that make it really important. May I ask a more mundane question to Lieutenant Donahue about your project with the senior centers? We in the town of Southampton are working with Tom and the trust and the sheriff's department and the town trustees just to install 3 of them in our senior centers. And we're working with the sheriff's department right now to sort of figure out the staffing impacts. When you say you're picking up weekly in Suffolk County senior centers, what kind of volume are you expecting, and how is it that you came up with that weekly schedule?
Well, it's actually once a month that we do this, and we've only done it once thus far, and we collected 229 pounds. So we had no idea how successful or unsuccessful it would be. But for the one event we had in actually 6 centers, not 7, we picked 1 per precinct. It was 229 pounds.
That's aggregate of the 6 centers?
And we have an officer that comes off patrol and mans that collection box for 3 hours and then collects the drugs and brings it right to our property bureau where they get weighed and categorized.
That's helpful to know. And can anybody just answer what happens with liquids?
I'm confused. You say weighed and categorized. I thought you agreed
I shouldn't
that...
have said categorized.
Okay.
They get categorized by poundage per precinct.
Okay.
Not
content.
We have no idea what the content is.
Okay.
Regarding liquids, it's recommended that if liquids are going to be disposed in a collection receptacle, that the container be wrapped in paper towels and then placed inside a plastic bag and sealed, so that once it's dropped in there, in case there is any breakage, the paper towels will absorb the liquid. Now, there is another question over here, Dave.
Sure.
Julie Burmeister, I don't know how you want to categorize me as a citizen, I guess. To follow up on Bridget's, we live on sand out here, and most of us do not even have septic tanks. So in one of your diagrams, you had a 20, 40, 60-year filtration from the collecting system. Out here, Dr. Gobler has even suggested something like 2 years before it reaches the estuaries or the water tables. And I know my own father dug his well probably many, many years ago, 15 feet, and he hit water. A local farmer, I was talking with him, he dug a well for irrigation. He hit it at the water table now at 7 feet. So it gives you an idea that our timeline isn't exactly as long as upstate New York.
Right, and especially when you get closer to water bodies, a lot of times those, the closer you get, the shorter the residence time. And that's just a generalized cartoon, and it really applies a lot more to a public water supply, which when you turn it on can start drawing water. You can get trace amounts because you're drawing very old water, but you can draw down very young water as well. So you're mixing there as opposed to a small domestic well in the upper portion that's drawing mostly new groundwater, recently recharged.
Any other questions or comments? Then I think I'd like you all to give a hand to our guests. Thank you very much.